This is Think Future with Calabucas. So, I have a question for you. So, food is an interesting topic. Let's talk about the future of food for a minute. So, you've seen out there recently that there are a lot of studies being done and a lot of investigation and experiments being done on replicating meat, right? You take cells from a cow and you put them in some kind of a solution and you replicate them. You clone these cells of a cow until eventually you have what looks to be a piece of meat that's been grown without the cow. There is no cow. We've taken some cells from a cow and we've cloned it and grown it to the point where it's actual meat, it's real meat. It's not genetically modified. It's actual real meat that has been grown, but it has been grown without the benefit of a cow. Now, I've heard that this meat isn't particularly good, so they're thinking about growing the fat as well, which of course everyone knows that the tastiest part of the meat is the fat. So they have to grow the fat and they have to grow the meat in order to make this meat grown meat, right? So if you think about grown meat for a second, you have to say to yourself, do I have or would I have an ethical issue with grown meat if I have an ethical issue with GMOs, right? Because GMOs are genetically modified food, right? If I take food, and if you think about it, we've kind of been genetically modifying food ever since we started growing food because we were trying to figure out ways of making food hardier, right? And it's not genetically modified at the cellular level. It's genetically modified in that, I'm going to splice this branch on this tree and see what happens, right? We use all sorts of methods to try and create new fruits, new vegetables, new things for human beings to eat and human beings to try, right? And we've done it without chemically changing anything for the longest time. For the longest time, we've had modified fruits and vegetables. I mean, they've been naturally modified in that all we did is bread stuff together, bread meat and bread vegetables together to come up with new ones. So we've done it in kind of a natural way, but the GMO stuff is basically just an extension of that. So instead of doing it at the natural level, we're doing it at the cellular level. So me personally, I don't have an issue with GMO foods. I know some people do, but that's fine. It's a personal preference. But let me ask you something. So GMO foods are genetically modified organisms which change the structure of a food. So it changes a food to be tastier, changes a food to be fattier, changes something about the food to improve the flavor for human beings to eat, right? And a lot of people have a problem with that because they say that's an unnatural way of creating food. So let me ask you something. Is creating grown meat fall into the same category? Because if you think about it, all you're doing with that is you're taking cells that would replicate on their own anyways inside of a live cow, and you're replicating them outside of a live cow in a completely different environment, but you're not affecting the cells themselves. You're just helping them to grow. Now, maybe you're introducing some other chemicals that might not be good, so I don't really know that much about it, but if you think about it this way, if you're reconstructing something cell by cell like you are with this grown meat, does that act the same way as a GMO produced meat? Or is it a completely different thing? So are we sidestepping the whole GMO argument by creating this grown meat through those forces? Now since I'm a futurist, let's skip forward a bit. Let's think about the future. So let's think about the replicator. So think about the Star Trek replicator. Now it wasn't called a replicator back in the original series days, but it was eventually called a replicator in the Next Generation. And what the replicator does is that it takes a piece of matter and it rearranges the molecules in this piece of matter until it becomes the thing you want it to. So if you want a cup of Earl Grey tea, it does that. If you want a chicken sandwich with a cup of coffee, it does that, including creating the cup and the plate that it's sitting on. So if we had a tool that could go down to the cellular level and atomically recombine things to become food that human beings can eat, would you say that that is GMO or not? Would you eat a piece of replicated steak? Now, personally, I would be okay with that. I would eat a piece of replicated steak as long as it was replicated properly, as long as the programming actually replicated steak. Because as far as I'm concerned, looking at that steak, tasting the steak, testing the steak, cutting off a piece of the steak and looking at it under a microscope, it's still a piece of meat. Even though the atoms may have come from a tire, right? So if we get to the point where we're replicating, where we're using Star Trek type replicators to rearrange the atoms of matter to the point where we can actually create meat or eggs or Earl Grey tea, would you want to eat something like that? It's not GMO. It's created atom by atom, just like that. So let me ask you something. Would that be something that you would eat? Would you eat replicated meat? Because if you think about it, that's exactly what this grown meat is. It's replicated meat.